I just would like to add to this because I think the point that you have mentioned that self-preservation of one group depends on in the imagination of that group, depends on the subordination of another group, is something that I think is very strong not only in the Israeli collective consciousness, but you can also see it in Western countries, right? We have to, okay, Muslims should have equal rights, but not too much equality, because God knows what they will do if they will have the same power that we have. And I can tell you, at least from what is frightening, I think, what is really frightening in Israel, thinking, you know, if they will have the same power, then God knows what they will do. I think the fear is that they can do exactly the same thing that we are doing, like bombing, you know, and killing 1,400 people in Gaza, in a closed prison. And for me, this, you know, it says something. It says something about this fear, and the fear is also from yourself, or from you know, the group that you belong, because you know what people in power are capable of. And I think what would be useful in sort of in this point is to remember that yes, I mean it's true, and power relations can certainly change, and it's not, and sometimes it is arbitrary. I think that the Jewish history is quite obvious on that. Yes, and it means that we have to be careful, and it means I mean all of us when we are approaching positions of power. And I think also, yes, I cannot, I mean, here speaking about, well, okay, not in the past 10 years, we're not really speaking about peace. But if we would be speaking about peace, you know, it's not like we could really guarantee or promise that after we end the occupation and after Palestinian refugees can return and after there is no more institutionalized apartheid in Israel, then everything will be great, you know? I cannot even be certain that it will be great for other people in Palestine, that it will be great for me or for my family. But I think the question is how we want to live our lives. And I certainly do not want to live my life fearing that somebody else can be as horrible and murderous as, you know. I don't think it's a way to live.
Thank you, Ina. Any further questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. Sitka, I'm a reporter for the Econ. Well, we will continue talking after this session.
We have that question.
Yeah, you didn't answer the question here.
Then maybe I misunderstood it.
He didn't have a question actually, he only made a statement.
On the colonization?
Yeah, the question. Yeah,
Okay, let me just take the question of Sitka and then
Maybe
come
I
back.
misunderstood your question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sitka, yeah.
Well, one practical question. Yeah, we talked about the Western complicity, and about stopping complicity. Can you give some practical tools and advices how we can do that?
I'll be happy to.
Okay, let me first let's first answer this question and then we come back. Okay?
Okay, the most important principle is to work with groups locally. In other words, we in occupied Palestine are not the best to decide what tactics should be used in the Netherlands. We wouldn't know what's best. We know there are some international targets like Veolia, Alstom, Caterpillar. There are certain companies. That's everywhere. That should be boycotted. And you have a lot of Veolia buses in this country running Amsterdam buses, and so you have plenty of targets. It's not a lack of targets. It's a matter of organizing. It's a matter of organizing and mobilizing mass support for this movement, because, as I always say, BDS is not leftist agenda. Of course, leftists are the first to support it, but it's a very liberal agenda. It calls for upholding international law and human rights. You don't have to be a Marxist, Leninist to support BDS. You can be just a normal liberal person who believes that law should apply to all humans. That's good enough. If you believe that first principle I put up of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we're in business. You can be a BDS supporter, because that's all you need to support, really. You don't need to go beyond that. We don't talk about the economic order. So I think it's important to go beyond progressive circles and reach out to the mass, to the bigger circle. That's the key point. Now, picking a target, there are two kinds of targets. There are international campaigns, as I said, international companies, international institutions that should be boycotted. The Jewish National Fund, which I assume is a charity in this country as well. It has tax-exempt status everywhere. And it's a vicious colonial racist entity that should not at least be a charity. And there are the companies that are involved, and there are the academic connections if you're an academic or a student. Severing links with Israeli universities is a campaign that all students and academics can work on. The University of Johannesburg was the first to sever links with an Israeli university in the world, the first. And that was in March of last year. And that happened because a small group of very committed academics, South African academics, got together and mobilized more than 400 academics, including people like Desmond Tutu and you know, John Dugard, and the top names in South Africa, and 4 presidents of universities. And together, they forced, they compelled, they pressured the University of Johannesburg to sever links. In this country, I mean, one activist, she's not here with us, Adri Newhoff, who's a veteran of the South African anti-apartheid movement, almost single-handedly started pressuring ASN back. And then she got all other friends, and like Chef Handmaker here, and friends from ECO and other places, to pressure with her the bank, until they got the bank to divest from Veolia. This started with a one-woman effort, really. So when citizens take their rights seriously, and take the issue of complicity very seriously, there's a lot that can be done against institutions that are complicit, from corporations to universities to other places. In churches, when I mentioned the churches, the pension funds, pursuing the pension fund divestment issue, which is big in the US, but it's not as big in Europe. We don't hear about it a lot. The Church of the Netherlands must be a very rich church, because the Netherlands is a rich country. So its pension fund must be like really big. And I'm sure it's invested in many companies that are quite nasty and committing human rights violations. I know it's difficult when you get to investments, because people don't want to, you know, that's all I care, I'm getting the profit, I'm getting the interest on my investment. I don't want to mess with what company is good and what's bad, is it profitable or is it not? And BDS is not just a moral quest, it's also a practical quest. So we consider those pragmatic questions. And in fact, from the South African experience, we can tell that something in the English terms they use is fiduciary responsibility, which is the obligation of investors to just care about the profit. That your obligation as an investor to the people you get the money from is to worry about their profit. You don't worry about human rights, international law, and all this other stuff, because that's irrelevant. That doesn't increase or decrease profit. That has changed. That conception, that orthodoxy has changed. After South Africa, we can say that companies involved in grave violations of human rights are in fact not very stable. Because while you're making a lot of profit now, if the system of oppression collapses, your investment is finished, as happened in South Africa. If your company is privatized, Intel opened a huge factory in Israel, $2 billion factory, research facility in Israel. Is it very stable? I mean, is it the most stable country on earth where Intel had to open that factory? Obviously not. Obviously not. So there's a lot of politics and so on. What I meant to say is that even from a fiduciary perspective, from a financial perspective, investments that are committing human rights violations are not sustainable and they might collapse. The risk factor is extremely high. So it makes sense financially, not just morally, to reconsider investments in companies violating international law. If the law changes tomorrow, if BDS grows more, a company like Caterpillar can see its share plummet immensely. And you know, forget hypothetical examples, let's take Veolia. Veolia is a huge company, but losing contracts worth $12 billion in 3 years is a huge loss, even for a company this big. And so if I'm a shareholder in Veolia, I would tell, get the hell out of Israel. What are you doing there? I'm losing money. All these lost contracts are money, is money lost. So I think we have to approach people also from the pragmatic consideration, not just the moral, ethical, and legal consideration. So I'll stop there.
I just would like to add that if you are, regardless of BDS, if you are interested in knowing about companies that are either Dutch or have presence in the Netherlands, and even if you want to cross-check with specific types of involvement, such as construction of the separation wall or providing electronic equipment for surveillance civilians, then you enter profits.org and you find that information. And the reason that we established this website is because as an anti-occupation organization, we were looking for strategic ways to contribute to ending the occupation. And the reason this website is in English and it targets the international community is because we realized that the occupation or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not about Israel-Palestine. It's very internationalized. And also the interests, including the economic interests that are invested in this system of oppression, so to speak, are also internationalized, and it's our mutual responsibility to act on this. I think also because the strength that we have as peace and human rights movements is that we don't have national borders, you know, that we are part of a global movement, that human rights and justice are universal values, and I think it's really one of the major, if not the major, sources for strength, for making difference, especially in the globalized world.
Thank you, Ina. That didn't get on the slides. Would you just take the mic?
I asked if you can see a red line that Israel is losing and not winning, and that it's more aggressive, more violence is a sign that it is losing, and not that some people will say, well, we have to do something because Israel is so violent.
Well, thanks, and thanks for holding us accountable.
Yeah, I mean, okay, on the one hand, you are right, because they are certainly panicking, and this is why we have such insanely anti-democratic laws that you could think about them a couple of years ago as a parody for Israel's anti-democratic path. But, you know, it doesn't really help the people who experience the violence to know that this is a sign of desperation. I think one of the problems is also that the people in power in Israel right now are completely drunk with this power, and they are going wild, and the fact is that they don't really care, I think, about, for example, the image that they are getting in the international diplomatic community. So on the one hand, you could say they are panicking, on the other, they are being it is not enough to hold them accountable. They continue going on this path, and each time the red line, or the limit is set lower and lower, and while you can have statements from the international community criticizing this or that law, or this or that form of political persecution, or the fact that Abu Adnan is on his 63rd day of hunger strike today, and he's handcuffed to the bed in contempt of a decision of the Supreme Court. I mean, you can have statements against it on various levels and various. But still, you don't really have any actual actions to back up those words, and still you have international agreements and trade and scientific development and so on being signed. And I think, okay, you could say maybe they are more desperate in a way, but I think they also don't care in a way. I think that they are not being held accountable. 1,400 people, even more, killed in Gaza to this day. Not one person held accountable for none of those deaths. And to me, it is clear that as long as as long as there is the option to violate the human rights and to be able to get away with it, you know, it will continue. And I think this is precisely where the responsibility of the international community is. Of course, there is currently a bill that is not yet a law that would make it illegal for Israeli organizations to call for universal jurisdiction. That is, to call for Israeli official suspect of war crimes to be tried in international courts and tribunals, just like other people suspect of war crimes. And I think this point of accountability, you know, you can say that they're more desperate, but I don't think that the psychology or, you know, whatever people have in their mind when they are making those decisions, I don't think it matters. You know, the same reason during the Second Lebanon War, I was asking myself, do they actually believe what they are saying? But then I realized it doesn't really matter, you know? I think what does matter are the actions and the fact that they can just get away with it and they're not being held accountable. So why not continue?
I don't see a correlation between using massive power and losing necessarily, because the US bombed Hiroshima decades ago, and it's not losing yet. And that was the highest use of power seen in the world. So I don't necessarily see that. Yes, it's sometimes a sign of desperation, but only sometimes, not always. But where's Israel now? Yes, it's on what many Israelis have called a suicidal path. And a suicidal path means the idea of Israel, the concept propagated across the world that this is a democracy in a sea of barbarism and so on and so forth, that's being lost. Israel concedes that it's losing hearts and minds. It controls governments. It has enormous power in governments across the Western world, especially, not the global South, but across the Western world, thanks to Congress, US Congress. I mean, that's the key power for Israel in the world, is the US Congress, and the power that US Congress projects. When the Dutch government doesn't behave, well, it always does. When the Belgian government doesn't behave, the US government can threaten it, you know, behave or else. When they thought of universal jurisdiction in Belgium against Ariel Sharon because of his war crimes, Condoleezza Rice immediately put an end to it with a very big threat against the foreign minister in Belgium. And yeah, in the Netherlands, you don't need to. But I'll just give two views by very famous Zionist Jewish Israelis about where they see the country now. One is, and I happen to have those quotes, so I'll just read them. One is an award-winning Israeli academic, Gabriel Solomon, who went as far as comparing Israel with Germany in the 1930s. He said, "The idea of Judenrein, a Jew-free zone, or Arab Rhine is not new. Some might say, how can you compare us to Nazis?" And he says, "I'm not talking about the death camps, but about the year 1935. There were no camps yet, but there were racist laws. And we are heading forward toward these kinds of laws. The government is clearly declaring our incapacity for democracy." Another very famous Israeli, Sefi Rachlevsky, who's one of the best-known Israeli writers, had a different perspective on this. And he said, "The struggle today is not between left and right in Israel, but between Democrats and fascists. Israel is becoming fascist and racist. In a sense, you could say we are more like not the madness that was in Germany in 1933, but in 1944-45. When they were in danger of losing the war, madness prevented them from stopping." So two very different perspectives on where Israel is headed. But the term fascism is now being used increasingly among liberal Zionists in Israel. So that is not a very easy or reversible damage to the Israeli system of oppression. It's self-destructing. And when we talk jokingly in the BDS movement that one of our most reliable partners is Netanyahu and Lieberman, in fact, they're quite reliable. I mean, they always say what we would like them to say, shooting themselves right in the foot, in both feet, in fact, and just whenever they open their mouths, BDS increases exponentially. So I think, yes, there is some alarm among Israeli Zionist establishment.
Let's come back to that. Thank you. Just one second. Thanks first of all for that question. It was an important question. It is 7 minutes to 10, and I think we should finish the debate by about 10 o'clock. I'll give you the chance to come back. I'll give you the chance to come back. I'll then take all the last questions that are there in one round, and then I will ask Ina and Omar to respond to those and to also close the debate. So first you have still for a short comment you have the floor, and then I would like to see the hands of those people who would still like to ask a question. Thanks, Emmanuel.
I think there's a
Just hold on. Yeah.
I think there's a difference between if you're winning or you're losing, because now Israel can say Palestinians are poor, Palestinians have no rights, Palestinians are, well, non-educated, Palestinians are. And I think there's a difference between your attitude, if you're winning or if you're losing. That's what I wanted to do.
Thanks. Can I see the hands of those who would like to ask a question as well?
Hello, my name is Hassan, software engineer in the Netherlands. Considering that Israelis see themselves as the chosen or selected nation among the other nations, I was wondering if the equality principle counts only for the locals in Palestine, or counts also for, let's say, in an international context. I was wondering if the equality principle from the BDS counts only for the locals in Palestine, or does it also count for the other context? I mean, in a kind of international context, considering that the Israelis see themselves as the chosen or the selected nation among others. Thank you.
Emmanuel, did you have a question yourself? No? There's a hand here. Okay, those are then the last two questions, I think. There in the back, and then Camille, you can go first. Thanks.
Yeah, my name is Mirjam van Reisen. I represent myself. As always. I was very impressed by the introductions and by all the activities that are made so far, and the successes as well. But I'm still quite a crucial question, because in your introduction, Omar, you referred to Mandela and Martin Luther King and the basic rights. And I think that is exactly the point that we are talking about. But with all your actions and our actions against banks and whatever, we're looking for a charismatic figure in the Palestinian community, and Mandela. Is that possible?
Thank you, Mirjam.
Can I answer it?
Question there.
My name is Cornelieke Keizer. Listening to your presentations, I was thinking that I have been convinced about BDS as a strategy for a couple of years now. And I've tried my best not to be silent and to be active at times. But to my big frustration, I haven't been able to convince my mom. She's very religious, very Christian. And every time I try to talk about it, her gaze turns blank, or she stares at me. And I've not been able to do so. And maybe it's because I don't convey the message as eloquently as both of you have been doing. Or maybe because I turned an atheist in my teenage years. I don't know. But I was thinking, listening about the Paris document, and which I know of course about, I sent it to her. And the Bethlehem Call, if you have any strategies in how to use those documents with the schools better within, I mean, of course it's not about my mom, but within the Christian community better.
Thank you. So, Ina, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I think that the feminist in me had a strong desire to respond to this passion for the strong, charismatic leader, even though the debate is on the Palestinian society, where I don't really have any reason to take a decisive position on Palestinian leadership, but I would like to say that people such as Lieberman in Israel, or taking the example of Russia, people as Vladimir Putin, are there not so much because many people who go and vote for them read their program for the elections and think, oh, I like their economic policy. I can tell you that it's, and I think it's sort of common sense, yet that they represent this, you know, like strong, real men. And this is also, I mean, if you look, I mean, Putin, look at this when you hear speeches of the young movement there, you know, this pro-Putin youth movements, you can actually hear women from this movement saying, come on girls, we have to support Putin because he's such a real man. And you know, Lieberman, I mean, people in Israel, you have a lot of social and economic problems, and you have immigrants, and you have people struggling, you know, for everyday survival, and people who feel that they are oppressed, because many people are oppressed on various factors in Israel, from their accent to their skin color, and when you have and when you are in this experience of being weak, you know, of not really having power, and you have this man who is the representation of this might and this power, and you so much want to identify with him, to get out of your experience of yourself as not having the power over your life, over your society, over the future of your family, and those things are very dangerous. Those things are very dangerous, and I think what is beautiful about the BDS movement is precisely its collective power that goes against this form of leadership, which in my view is, you know, is like the first stage towards tyranny.
Bravo.
I just want to add something myself to that, and then from my side close the evening, and then I'll give the floor for the final words to you, Omar. And first of all, I wanted to thank both of you. I really like what you just said, Ina. I'm sitting here from the University of Tilburg and from the Marga Klompé chair. Marga Klompé, I mean, the Dutch people here probably know, was the first female minister in the Netherlands. And she came to politics after the Second World War because she was a very important leader in the resistance, but a very silent leader, and I think very few people today know that she was. And from there she made the step to the United Nations, where with Hessel she was one of the negotiators on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it really was very important to her that it was a universal declaration and not an international declaration, and that it applied to every person, but that it also held every person personally responsible. And I think that is at the basis of what both of you have been saying, and that is also why how you shape the movement is important, in that it really calls on that personal responsibility. One of the interesting things that I found when I was doing my research on Marga Klompé were two things that relate to the debate tonight. First, that she was one of the very early people who held companies accountable for their investments in South Africa. So in terms of that responsibility, she also recognized the responsibilities of companies, and also for every individual to call on them to be responsible. That's one thing. And the second is that she was on the board of UNESCO. And so when she chose to meet Palestinians, it actually was quite difficult a political decision at that time for her to make. And well, it's an interesting parallel in terms of where UNESCO is now having recognized the Palestinian state. So for me, I've taken a lot of inspiration from that. I've also taken a lot of inspiration from both of you. Also, thank you very much for the questions. You made my job in that regard very easy. I also want to conclude by saying that what I take personally back from this conversation is that with my colleagues Fadi from the Amsterdam University and some other academic colleagues that are here, we will really need to see how we take that some steps further. And I really thank you for, again, explaining the relevance of BDS and also explaining how it really can be shaped in a way that each and everyone can take that personal responsibility. So thank you once more, and I really would like this evening to be closed by Omar. So Omar, the floor is yours to close this evening.
Thank you. I'll first answer the question about the religious mom. I think this is, I mean, many of us might have faced something similar on a different issues. Convincing your mother is not something easy, let's face it. Especially when it's something really close to her heart, an ideology that she grew up with, it's really difficult. In the Dutch church tradition, Christian Zionism was always there. It's one of the roots of Christian heritage in this country, as I understand it. And that's not very easy, to tell them that the Bible is not translated into Israel. It doesn't lead to Israel. If you believe in the Bible, you don't have to support Israel. It's not the manifestation of God's will, and God doesn't do real estate. It's not easy. I mean, okay, if you're not religious, it's easy and you laugh about it, but if you're religious, it's not easy. I think many people have gone through conversions, so to speak, in their own way. One very effective way is visiting. We've seen quite a few Dutch Zionists, American Zionists, French Zionists, even some German Zionists convert. Convert as in stop their support for Israel's oppression of the Palestinians after visits. Without Palestinians saying a word, Israel speaks volumes. Its oppression is in your face. You don't have to look very hard to see what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. I'll just tell you what one UN official recently said about what Israel is doing, and this is amazing coming from such a high UN rapporteur. Her name is Raquel Rolnick, and she accused Israel of adopting a strategy of Judaization to make the country Jewish, getting rid of others. And she says, quote, "From the Galilee and the Negev to East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the Israeli authorities promote a territorial development model that excludes, discriminates against, and displaces minorities, particularly affecting Palestinian communities, side by side with the accelerated development of predominantly Jewish settlements." And she said, from the Galilee to the Negev to the West Bank. I mean, that's the first time a UN rapporteur mentions Judaization within Israel. So I think if your mother is convinced to visit, and you know, Palestine is not just about occupation and oppression, it's a nice country. I mean, you can still enjoy yourself, and we have very good food, and you have the Church of Nativity and so on. I mean, for a Christian pilgrim, it's the place to go, ultimately. And if you have connections, if you know people, Econ or others who can suggest to you where to go, or Ina can suggest to you where to go, there are many progressive people there that can help her choose places without anyone telling her a word. And then let her go through the natural process of seeing oppression and being transformed from what she's seeing and what her mind tells her, what her conscience tells her to do. I think that's the best way. Rather than banging, you know, with her head with all these arguments and so on.
Tourism is outside the boycott?
No, it's not. There's ethical tourism. There's ethical tourism and unethical tourism. Ethical tourism, you don't use complicit hotels, complicit airlines, complicit tour agencies, and so on.
I can tell you which.
Yeah. So we work on, well, almost all Israeli institutions are complicit. So we ask pilgrims to stay at Palestinian hotels, go to Palestinian restaurants, and so on. Anyway, regarding the Palestinian Mandela, I guess I don't have much to add, except that I think this single, powerful, almighty leader is overrated. It's really overrated. I think I agree with Ina about the absolute need to see the power of the collective. It's extremely important, much more difficult, but it's very important to see the power of the collective. And in the BDS movement, we're very proud that it has the absolute majority supporting it. Across the board, all the political parties, women's unions, trade unions, everyone supports it with very few exceptions. And I think this gives us a lot of power, that it's not a one-person charismatic leadership that's driving this, but it's the quest for justice and aspirations of a large mass. It would be nice to have some leaders who can speak well and so on, unlike the ones we have currently, unfortunately. But it's not an essential condition to reach justice and equality, I think. The clarity of vision and the principle and the smart tactics is much more important than charisma, in my view. And I'll finally end with the equality issue. It's absolutely necessary to view equality on a universal basis. And I agree that the Universal Declaration is the universal declaration. It's not an international declaration of human rights, because it should apply to every single human being. And as a human rights activist, I completely categorically adopt that position, that I would never accept inequality in any form, regardless who's committing it. I'm personally very inspired by Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator. Maybe some of you may know him. I'm extremely influenced by Paulo Freire's philosophy. And I'll just quote him, something that I always use in my talks, in my presentations, and it really goes deep to heart. But just to put it in context, the Israelis committing oppression, which is the great majority of the Israeli public, are themselves in the process of dehumanizing the Palestinians, are losing their own humanity. You can't be an oppressor and be a full human at the same time. By dehumanizing the other, you're dehumanizing yourself. There's no switch that you can turn off when you go home and you become civil. That's why domestic violence in Israel is enormous. It's extremely high. Because all these soldiers butchering Palestinians cannot go home and act normal. There's no switch. Your psychology becomes totally messed up. So that there's a lot of damage that's done to the Israeli society as well. Much less than Palestinian society, obviously, but there's a lot of damage done to Israeli society, to the normal human beings. And as Ina mentioned, if I'm an Israeli parent, I wouldn't want to think which army platoon my daughter will go to after finishing college, after finishing high school. I would want to think what kind of career she wants to take, what kind of things she wants to do, to travel, to have fun, whatever. But not which army platoon and whether or not she will die in the next battle. I mean, no parent wants to think like that. And Israelis are not genetically, their DNA is not different than humans. They're part of the human species. So ultimately, despite all the racism, despite all the fascism that's growing in Israel, ultimately, we are counting that we can reach the rational thinking, and this morality that's deep inside still needs a lot of pressure to come out. And BDS is the best way to bring that out. It's there. We never lose hope that it's there, but it takes enormous pressure to bring it out, to remove all those layers of hatred and racism that prevent them from seeing what should be done. So I'll end with a quote from Paulo Freire. He says, "The oppressed must not, in seeking to regain their humanity, become in turn oppressors of the oppressors, but rather restorers of the humanity of both." Thank you.
The book is here on the side. Thank you.
Where is it here? In the corner, right? There, no, I think.